The movie opens up in a bank robbery, and the whole bank's in utter chaos. A man walks towards the stored safe and opens it with a small detonation. He gets his hands on some menacing-looking device. Meanwhile, outside, the cops arrive, and a little girl slowly skips towards the bank. She approaches the bankers and reveals herself to be Frank Drebin. He begins to easily take on robbers, smacking their guns away and even eating one's gun. He takes a robber body and uses it as a shield. He throws the body at them, causing the men to shoot themselves. But outside, the man with the ominous device gives it to another person. The next day after the bank robbery, Frank is on his way to the police station. He gets a celebration of catching 100 bad guys. But Chief Davis isn't having it. She calls Drebin and his partner, Captain Ed Hawken, into her office. It seems the bank robbers Frank put in the ICU are lawyering up to sue the police. The police squad is being threatened of a shutdown, and she takes Frank Drebin of the bank case. He leaves the office winking his camera would be on. Frank and Hawken reach the framed picture of Frank's dad, Frank Drebin Sr. They both take a moment to talk to their fathers. Frank wants to be like his father, but different, and so he asks for a sign, an owl. The scene then changes to Frank and Hockey arriving at the new crime scene, a car crash. There weren't any skid marks on the road, so Frank figures out the car didn't try to stop before crashing. They find a man inside with some empty pill bottles and a tiger tag. The case seems to be a suicidal one, since the man had no wife, no kids, and was basically an alcoholic. Back at the police department, Frank and Hawken walk in, but are approached by another officer. She tells them something strange about the bank heist. The thieves were told to keep the cash, and none of them knew who they were working for. Frank tells her to bring some of the perps for questioning. Meanwhile, Frank finds out a woman is waiting for him, and it appears to be the sister of the car crash victim. She says Frank is wrong and her brother didn't die of suicide. She spoke to him last night, finding out he was in some sort of trouble, and they planned to meet this morning. She says Simon was a programmer for Richard King's, and she tries suggesting some actions Frank should take. He disagrees, telling her to leave the police work to him. He says if someone did kill her brother, he'll find him out. She gives him her contact and leaves the office with his chair. Frank goes to a party being hosted by Richard King's, and luckily enough, Richard recognizes him and decides to have a walk with him. Frank asked him about Mr. Simon Davenport, but Richard doesn't have anything much to contribute. He tells Frank he's a big fan of his, men of action that don't take permission to fix what's broken. He brings out a cigar to smoke, and Frank instantly recognizes the lighter. Richard tells him it's a signal of the club he owns, a club where men can be themselves. They make a few jokes with the words that can be said in the club, and Frank takes his leave. Richard makes a call to get Frank a gift. The next day, Frank is shown the first ever electric police car from Richard King's. They test the car features out, and Frank literally destroys the prison wall. He goes to interrogate a robber who's been denying he wasn't at the bank robbery. Frank knows the mastermind wasn't after money, and so they pulled out his body cam. After going through some clips, they find the evidence. The man confesses they did get some safety deposit box, and after Hawken checks the list, he reveals the owner is Simon Davenport. The scene changes to a meeting between Richards and some shareholders. Richard says their company was built to improve the world, but yet it has gotten worse. Ungrateful people who didn't deserve their seats in society. Richard admits the path they're on isn't working, and he shows them a new device known as the plot device. This device transmits brain waves that reduce humans to their animalistic behavior. He plans to use it on the world through their smart devices, and have an open safe bunker for billionaires. He says when they return, the humans would have destroyed themselves, and only the best would remain. They plan to rebuild the Earth afterwards as the Founding Fathers. This is the Planet Inferno plan. Later that night, Frank Drebin makes his way to a nightclub. He asks if the man knows Stephen Davenport, but the bartender refuses to talk. The bartender reveals Frank shot his brother in the back in the name of justice. He says he might have seen the man, but he can't remember. Frank smashes his head until he remembers and directs him to a back room. Just then, Frank sights Simon's sister. Beth tells Simon she told him she wasn't going to sit around in the death of her brother. Richard calls out to them, but he doesn't know Beth is Simon's sister. He introduces Beth to Richard as Cherry and asks if he can take a look at Richard's security footage. Richard refuses, using the excuse they provide their customer with the best and secure privacy. Richard offers Beth a drink, and Frank uses the opportunity to investigate. He takes out the security and goes into the room alone. He keeps making noises while walking and trips, alerting the men. A guard comes to tell Richard what's going on, but Beth distracts him by putting on a show. Meanwhile, Frank is in a heated battle with the goons. He keeps punching and fighting till he defeats them. He goes through the database and finds a video showing a conversation between Simon and Richard. He also finds additional information, but men are quickly approaching. He immediately goes out the emergency door, but this causes an alarm. Just then, Chief Davis gets a call about Drebin actions and requests for him this instant. Chief Davis says Richard Kane is a very powerful man and he makes a lot of donations to the city. Frank disagrees, saying Richard is a dirty man. Chief Davis can't deal with this anymore, and she suspends Frank for 2 weeks. Just as Frank arrives back home, Beth Beth is already waiting for him. They go inside his house, but they're being watched. Beth compliments his home and gives condolences to his wife. Richard Goon keeps watching from outside, but he misunderstands what's going on. The same thing happens when Frank's dog comes in. The next day, Frank is driving to meet with a man from the video, Douglas O'Reilly. He notices the man's door is open, and he goes inside to check. He takes hold of a bloody knife and makes a recording framing himself. He then goes into Douglas' room and sees his dead body. Just then some police show up and Frank realizes what's going on. He makes a run for it and manages to get away. But it's not over yet. Mr. Richard takes control of the car and increases the speed. He plans to use the electric car and run Frank into the ocean, killing him just like Simon. Frank has no other option, but he quickly shoots the glass. He tampers with the controls and gets the door open, letting him survive. He tells Hawken what's going on and finds out the mayor shut down the police department. He goes to meet with Beth and tells her what's going on. Beth reveals the truth to Frank. On the night her brother called, he told her about a device he was working on, a therapeutic device to calm people down. He feared it could do the opposite, and so if he ever died, he told his sister to make sure she stopped it. Frank gets upset that she lied to him at the beginning. He gets a call and goes to find the head of security for Richard King's. They get him into a car and drug him. He wakes up in some kind of hospital and finds out Richard Kane has been arrested. Frank steps forward, telling him they stopped the plan and won. He says Richard is confessing and putting all the blame on him. He interrogates him, painting a scenario for the man and forcing him to confess. He tells him about the whole plan of Mr. Richard, and they need to act fast. The stage falls down, and the police quickly get the recording intact. They have 48 minutes till midnight, when Richard King's plan is going to be unleashed on WWC. Frank and Hawken use some plugs to block the frequency, just in case it goes off. Frank is worried. He hasn't been able to reach Beth throughout. But just then, Beth approaches the WWC, dressed like the killer from her book. By the way, if you're still watching at this point, you're in too deep to quit. Might as well hit that like button so the algorithm doesn't leave this buried like Richard's morals. She goes to meet with Richard and reveals herself. She joins him. Only 25 minutes left. The fight begins, and Beth reaches in her bag for a gun. The gun doesn't shoot, and Richard reveals he's read her books. Frank begins to search for the device, trying to find it as quickly as possible. He gets his hands on it and manages to remove the device in time. He takes the microphone away from the host and tells them to evacuate. He sees more security coming and quickly makes a run for it. Richard tells his goons to put their frequency earbuds in. They immediately get to Frank, and he threatens to shoot it. Richard activates the machine instantly, and the world goes into chaos. Everyone's fighting. The billionaires try to make their getaway. Richard says his final word to Frank and escapes. Frank immediately has to deal with multiple ravaging people and takes them all head on. He enters a jeep to go after them, and just then sees the sign from his father. He teams up with the owl, going after the billionaires. He kicks them to stop them, and his owl dad poops on Richard, causing him to crash. Frank tells Richard it's not too late to stop the madness, and Dave Bautista makes a cameo. He says the need of the future shouldn't outweigh the needs of the many. Frank steps in to continue, and Dave gets rushed by the people. Richard says it's wonderful, and this will be the final fight. They square off, and Frank lands one hit on him. This throws him off. Richard's never been in a fight before. He says he's not fighting anymore and tries to make a getaway. He fails miserably, and Frank arrests him. Beth also shows up, and Frank tells her it's over. She disagrees, pulling out a gun on Richard. Frank tries to stop her, begging her not to do it, for the sake of their future. She drops the gun, goes to get the device, changes the settings, and reverses everyone back to normal. Richard is taken into custody, and Frank tells Beth one last thing. They share a moment together, and the movie comes to an end. If you enjoyed this ending even a little, you know what to do. Sub, like, or drop your wildest theory in the comments, because we're just getting started. I'll see you soon in the next video.